When Monday morning came, I drove her to the airport and put her on a Sacramento-bound aircraft. We'd agreed not to call each other until Saturday came around, but when it finally came, we both got busy signals because we were calling each other at the same time. From then on, we met whenever we could. The thing was great, and so were the times we made it different, the times we made love. For a time, we were making American Airlines rich with our travel back and forth, but my move to Denver finally came about and the trip was shorter. We saw each other every couple of weeks for a year and a half and took 2-week-long vacations together, one in Vail and the other in the Bahamas. I finished the flying lessons I'd let lapse years earlier and got my certificate. I promptly bought a small, single-engine Cessna whose upkeep and operating costs were even more than airline tickets, but I could fly on my schedule. The memory of the time, I took Karen up and we initiated each other into the Mile High Club high over the mountains kept me smiling for weeks. Melissa's diary. I was happy for Ron. After seeing him so miserable for so long, it was good that he'd found someone he could be happy with and who seemed to have his best interests at heart. They made a beautiful couple on the 3 occasions Cal and I saw them about town and especially on the dance floor at Fisher's. Ron, I could tell, had taken some dancing lessons, though I didn't know when he'd found the time. Their effect was more than evident. He and Karen would glide around the ballroom floor almost effortlessly, their arms wrapped around each other and their attention focused completely on each other. It was clear they were in love, and I had mixed feelings about that. I'd been Sherry's best friend since high school and Ron was a comparatively recent addition to my list of close friends. But he was so happy and I couldn't blame him one bit. Karen was so beautiful and Ron was a much better looking man than he knew. I knew more than a few women in the club who would have left their dates, and some their husbands, in a heartbeat if Ron had crooked his finger and beckoned them to come to him. But he'd never do that. I knew my Ronnie. It's enough to say that the two of them just seemed to fit perfectly together. Now that he's moved to Denver, Ron emails me once a week or so, always full of cheerfulness and inquiries about the new baby and everything. I never told Ron I was sure Cal had gotten me pregnant the night both Karen and I took off our underwear in Fisher's ladies' room, but I think he knows. I did tell him about the panty thing in Fisher's, and that was probably enough. Ron's a smart guy and reads between the lines pretty well. When Calvin Jr. was born 6 months after Ron left, I'm not sure he realized the R that was Cal's middle initial was for Ronald. That was just like him. That Cal Sr. and I had given our baby his middle name in recognition of Ron's friendship would never occur to our good friend. Anyway, after her divorce, things were really rough for Sherry, and that went on for a long while. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. She had to quit her job because the word got around the office about her and Ron's divorce and what caused it. Every unattached male, and many who weren't, thought what he had between his legs was just the thing to make her happy again. Even though she cut everyone off cold and embarrassed a number of them in the process, they wouldn't quit trying. Her new job was at lower pay, and she found it hard for a time to pay all the bills. She finally found the big 2-bedroom apartment she wanted, but it cost more than she really had to spare, and she had to buy a lot of new clothes too. When the sale of the house she and Ron had lived in finally closed, things got better, but she was soon buying food, clothes, and what all for those 2 other people who came into her life, and well, I don't really want to get into that. I didn't understand what she was doing for the longest time, and I still don't agree with her reasoning. I mean, those 2 roommates, as she called them, weren't going to intimidate my... Shoot, I said I wasn't going to get into that mess, didn't I? Enough said. It took till almost a year after their divorce for me to get comfortable with Sherry again. She called me every week during that time and never got off the phone without apologizing to me and Cal for that Vegas nightmare. She was sorry, but sorry don't cut it sometimes, you know? Well, that's what I thought. But after a while, it was clear the girl was absolutely overwhelmed, totally ashamed of what she'd done with that man in Vegas and more ashamed of seeing him after she came home. Separate from that, she was also devastated that she had hurt her husband so badly. She couldn't talk to me for even a minute without breaking down and crying when she tried to say how bad she felt about betraying his trust and love. She'd felt guilty at the time, she said, but she got messed up in a feeling of dirty excitement. She said it had given her a fluttery feeling in her belly like when she used to sneak out of her mom and dad's house to meet with her first serious boyfriend. She said doing that guy from Vegas made her feel young and alive again, vibrant and a good kind of nasty. I didn't understand any of it, and the part about feeling young again didn't sit well at all. I turned 30 year before last, and Sherry was just 29 now. I wasn't sure I bought a single word she said about a need to feel young again. The little twit. Hey, guess what? I didn't know this until Sherry and I resumed visiting each other on Saturday mornings again for coffee and a little gossip. That was a long time coming, let me tell you. I was some kind of unhappy with that girl for the longest time. Anyhow, she told me one morning that she'd actually been at Fisher's one night back then, all by herself, and she'd seen Ron there with Karen. She said it had been just before he moved to Denver. She'd gone just to have a decent dinner. She didn't have to cook, but she wound up watching them dance while she tried to eat a cold steak. Sherry said what she had done to Ron really came home to her right then and there. She said she hadn't understood, not way down deep where she lived, exactly what Ron had gone through, what he'd felt. That changed when she saw him with that woman, as she put it. Seeing that Ron cared for Karen really hurt. It was like someone had driven a stake right through her belly, she said. She actually felt a physical pain, according to her. I told her Ron had every right. I was a little snippy about it, I think. I said he had a perfect right to be seeing Karen, and Sherry said she knew that, and she'd known it at the time. They'd already been divorced a month and more at the time, but it still hurt her worse than anything she'd ever known. She was only telling me so I'd know she finally realized how shitty she had treated the man she loved and who had loved her. I told her it was about time, and Sherry didn't even get mad at me. Actually, she was real bitter mad at herself. She wanted to punish herself, but didn't know how. She had too many responsibilities. Well, Sherry and I got through that phase and we've gotten closer. I suggested she get a little counseling or talk to a minister or something. When she got back on her feet financially, she did go see a guy who did marriage counseling and she got better. She never got comfortable with what she'd done, but she came to accept the things she'd done without them dominating her whole life. If she'd let it, I'm not too sure she wouldn't have wound up in a mental hospital or something. She felt that bad about it. She comes over all the time now, and we talk about anything under the sun, just like we used to. My boys think their Aunt Sherry hung the moon and stars, and they run to greet her whenever she comes around. She hugs them tight and gives them tickles and kisses until they laugh and laugh and laugh. Cal took longer to warm back up to Sherry. For the longest time, he would quietly be somewhere else whenever she came over. Between what I was telling him from my talks with Sherry and the things that he saw firsthand, he slowly thawed. Sherry used to bring her 2 roommates over to visit every so often, and Cal took to them right off. After a while, the house seemed a little empty when the 3 of them weren't there. I'm going to fix that though. Cal and I are going out to dinner at Fisher's tonight, and I'm not even going to wear a pair of underwear out there to begin with. We're going to work on having a house full of people all the time, even if I have to change diapers on a bunch of them. I want a girl this time. The first 3 years in Denver were busy, exciting, and jam-packed. I was working hard and spending long hours in the office. It was the same old story. When the big bosses find out you can handle responsibility, they give you more pressure and additional responsibilities just to see if they can find your breaking point. They hadn't found mine yet, but they were surely getting close. Karen and I didn't seem to cool off at all, and I was thinking of giving her a ring and asking her to marry me. She never brought the subject up, though, and I sometimes wondered why. Then the shit hit the fan in Afghanistan. Our firm had secured a number of subcontracts from one of the major Defense Department contractors to rebuild the infrastructure in that poor country. In one of them, we were acting as a service corporation, gathering the resources and subletting our own contracts to smaller firms to perform a myriad of tasks, very much like Halliburton does in Iraq. We just do it on a much smaller scale. Anyway, we were overseeing a contract to build a major highway north from Kabul through Faizabad and up to the border with Tajikistan. The road was going to be used primarily for military purposes for a long time, but the newly free elected government of Afghanistan hoped someday it would promote trade in the northern Intermountain region between the two countries. It was dangerous because the shredded remnants of the Taliban and al-Qaeda terrorists who'd gotten their asses kicked by a U.S.-supported group of Afghani warlords weren't that far away in the steep mountains on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. They came back across the border from time to time, slipping through an increasingly tight ring of Pakistani, Afghani, and U.S. soldiers to wreck whatever they could and then run hard back to their sanctuaries. It didn't happen often. It was, more often than not, a one-way mission, and the number of willing suicides had been steadily decreasing for years. One such group, though, managed to sneak into the country and had blown up a key bridge over an impassable gorge and shut down the road between our crew at the head of the new road and the supply depots in the rear. At the same time, they'd gone through a number of the small towns and villages for 50 miles around the bridge, destroying such things as schools built to educate both girls and boys, community centers, a few fledgling radio stations, and one television relay site. The contractor personnel on the ground had called back for help, and our firm had had to let a contract to another small business so our main contract could get finished on time. It was important for our future as a corporation. 72 hours later, young Mr. Ron Masters was in the air heading for Kabul to supervise the combined effort of two dissimilar groups of workers now working on the same project. Both companies had agreed to that. In fact, they'd been relieved they wouldn't have to work out a pecking order and try to find for themselves an equitable division of the labor. Before I left, though, I had to have a talk with Karen. I'd be gone a long time, and some things between us needed to be resolved. I needed to know if there was an us, and if so, what were we going to do about it?